morning and welcome. The budget is the most important thing that we do here at the legislature. Sometimes it gets clouded by little fire ants and marijuana and other things, but the budget is what it's all about. You may know that the other day the Senate passed the supplemental budget. It's the earliest that they've ever done that, and the chairman of Ways and Means said that the budget represented an austere supplemental budget. He also used the term prudent, and he said at the end of the day we can all be proud of this budget. I cast the only no vote on the supplemental budget after careful deliberation, and my reasoning for doing so is, first of all, I don't think $23.7 billion is austere. Secondly, I don't think it's prudent under the conditions that we're living under now, the reduction in growth estimates by the Council of Revenues, a pullback on federal defense and non-defense expenditures that we were anticipating, and the overall continuing malaise of Hawaii's economy. I continue to maintain we have not turned the corner. We see more businesses closing, we see more vacancies of office space, and overall, while the governor talks about having a new day, we in this office continue to maintain what we should be striving for is a better day. We see that people are having a more difficult time, and if you talk to them privately and confidentially, many of them will tell you how on the edge they really are. And that's why something like a minimum wage bill, which is still wending its way through the House and Senate and will wind up in conference, is not a slam dunk, but it's not a positive thing for improving our business climate. So, with that as a backdrop, looking at the supplemental budget, I think it's important for people to understand, and they don't understand, that even when we talk about reducing the budget or cutting the budget, what we're talking about is here's the base budget, the operating level of agencies and programs and all that. And then these are the expenditure projections that come in from these different agencies and from the governor. And the cutting has been taking place in this area here. We have not cut any of the core functions, even though a lot of people complain about that. We have continued to grow government at a rapid rate. That's where the employment increases have taken place. And we've got more and more government intervention. And the argument after a government program is we've got to continue to fund it. We've got to continue to increase the personnel and the office space and everything else. And that's the bad cycle that we are a part of. You overlay all of this with the continuing unfunded liability of the state, over $20 billion, which is a direct charge to the taxpayers of the state. And you get very important considerations about how we're going to maintain this. Our population, particularly the working population, is not increasing to the extent that we can depend on more revenues. I think the Hawaii Health Connector has found that out. We have not done a good job on maintaining our infrastructure, roads aside, harbors, airports, and all of that. So these are big ticket items, but we seem to have a real difficult time in prioritizing what we do. And it is hard to say no to somebody or to their program, particularly in election year. So what we've tried to do dispassionately for a number of years, and we really stepped up the effort last year, is to come up with what we consider to be a realistic budget with realistic figures that, importantly enough, change the direction, the course of the fiscal progress of the state. Because if we don't, we are going to run out of cash, we are going to run out of options, we are going to have our best and brightest leaving us with a homeless problem, which is among the top of the nation, with the consumption of welfare benefits, which is #1 in the nation, food stamps, which is #1 in the nation. You don't build a healthy and successful progressive economic society on that. So I'm very pleased to introduce our budget director, Paul Harleman, who has done a fantastic job of putting together figures even for the supplemental 2 years. And remember, the executive must present a 6-year financial plan, 2 years of which must be budget balanced. That's what our Constitution says. The legislature looks at that 6-year plan, but again, only is responsible for 2 years of balancing the budget. And in fact, they have presented a budget with reductions to balance it on 2 years and actually part of the third. But they are admitting that we will be in a deficit position for 3.5 years after that. And that's what we're concerned about. We're not concerned about short term, we're concerned about long term. And present Paul Harleman to give you specifics on our supplemental budget. Paul?
So I'm here to give you a brief overview of the Senate minority supplemental alternative budget for the fiscal years 2014 and 15. Here, our focus of the alternative supplemental budget is only on fiscal year 2015. So the alternative budget advances two simple yet effective fiscal and economic policies. Number one, reduce the rising cost of living for Hawaii's taxpayers and improve the business climate for small business owners through specific tax reforms, which we have introduced this session. Number two, make government less expensive and more effective through budget cuts. Guided by these fiscal and economic policies, the alternative budget accomplishes three important objectives. Number one, in contrast to the current House and Senate budgets, the alternative budget balances the state budget in the long run. As you can see on the graph which shows the forecasted carryover ending balances for the state's general fund from 2013 till 2019. As the graph indicates, the current governor's supplemental budget as well as the current Senate and House budget drafts are all forecasted to run deficits every year, moving forward to the state's 6 years financial plan. So as the graph shows, as early as 2016, under the current plans, the state is forecasted to run out of cash balances, which will be unconstitutional. The alternative budget is the only sustainable budget that is balanced beyond the current fiscal year. In comparison to the Senate budget, the alternative budget reduces the size and cost of government by $795 million and limits future growth to inflation only. The alternative budget is projected to leave the state treasury with an ending general fund balance of $2 billion by using the current Council on Revenue's revenue growth estimates and $486 million by using the Senate minority's more conservative revenue estimates. The budget proposes a total of $11.3 billion in appropriations for fiscal year 2015. This represents a $795 million cut, or 7% cut in comparison to the current Senate budget. The $795 million consists of $480 million in general funds and $350 million in special funds. As the graph on my left highlights, in terms of real spending growth, our budget would scale down the size of government to the 2013 spending levels. The proposed $795 million cut consists of the following: $70 million in general fund savings from discontinued government programs and services, $110 million in general and special fund savings by removing budgeted vacant full-time positions, $146 million in general fund savings to a 10% across-the-board cut in discretionary government spending, $207 million in general fund savings from targeted cuts, various programs within the Department of Education, Health, and the University of Hawaii, $350 million in special fund savings with an across-the-board cut of 10%. With the highest cost of living and the worst business climate in the nation, the Senate minority believes that tax reform could reposition Hawaii's economy to make it more competitive in the long run. Although revenue losses are often cited as a barrier to tax reform, the alternative budget proves the contrary and shows that Hawaii could move into a different direction of sustained balanced budgets and lower taxes for all.
You know, you mentioned the health and welfare spending growth, at least in the press release, surpassing the spending for public education. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
As of now, actually, if the current trend continues, and which is Medicaid spending that has doubled in the last decade. If that trend continues, then in the next 5 years or so, the state general fund spending on welfare would actually surpass the spending on public education. So if that trend continues in the next 5 years, we will be spending more on entitlements and less on on public education.
You propose cuts to Department of Education, Health, and University of Hawaii. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, well, some of the cuts, first of all, I'd like to mention that the cuts that we're making to the Department of Education are administrative costs. So they're not, our budget does not make any cuts for expenditures that go directly to the classroom. The University of Hawaii represents a 25% cut in general fund spending overall, so that includes all colleges as well as community colleges, because again, most spending for the Department of Health is driven by Medicaid growth. So if we cannot cut Medicaid growth, then we have to look at different areas.
What I said on the Senate floor the other day, you know, single moms don't have the ability to spend more than they take in. Families don't. Small businesses don't. Only government. But who pays for government? All of those other groups combined. But here's the number one thing to understand. This is not an austerity budget that's being debated right now in the legislature. And if we don't change our course, we are headed for fiscal disaster. And that's not just me saying that. That's other agencies, that's our budget director. We have a difference in philosophy, and that's what it's all about. And we can choose to continue spending and going into debt and creating a hostile environment for business and for taxpayers, or we can bite the bullet, make the hard choices now, and change our direction.
In two areas here, you talked about across-the-board spending cuts of 10%. In the past, policymakers have said that's sort of a ham-handed way to do that.
Yeah.
Are you a little concerned about that? I mean, is it just is it more effective to go look at programs that you consider wasteful rather than across the board?
Yeah, it is. It is more effective to do that, but people have shown that they don't have the willingness to do that. And so at this point, what I'm saying is we've got to have the cuts. We've got to have the reduction. And by the way, you asked the question about the University of Hawaii, my alma mater. Come on. The University of Hawaii gives us something to talk about each and every week. Wasted money, corruption, procurement lapses, buildings that aren't done on time, extra costs and all of that. That's the kind of cuts we're talking about. And nobody should be able to justify that. It has nothing to do with education, has nothing to do with the core mission of our only state publicly financed university. So folks that keep worrying about cuts should be more worried about the wasteful spending that's going on. And I think the public is finally getting this message, because the public is telling us that they want something done about that, and they're really unhappy that there are no consequences for poor government action. That's what we should be concentrating on. And that is not a partisan issue at all. It's a bipartisan issue to clean up government and do things for the public with the limited finances that we have. If not, thank you, and as we always say, have a better day. Aloha.